podcast. This is episode number 2. Now, on today's episode, we're going to take a look at something it's a big problem, for one thing. But one of the things that we don't do, right, as problem-solving people in general, is take a deep or an adequate dive and look into the severity of problems. We have this tendency, for whatever reason it happens to be, I guess it's for simplicity's sake, we typically like to look at low-hanging fruit as if that's the totality of the problem and go, well, that's the issue, right? Instead of looking at something that's very nuanced, that's very complex, right? We look at something and we just decide that's the main issue and that's what we need to address. And it's unfortunately, it's widespread and it's not true. So today's podcast, we're going to talk about the stigma that exists against the trades. Sometime about 3 years ago or so, the American Welding Society had an article come out, and they were talking about the stigma. More specifically, they were referencing a study done by metal supermarkets. I'm looking at my show notes here. The survey that was done by metal supermarkets. Now, AWS, just a little bit of a caveat, the only thing they particularly care about, because they're a one-issue company, right, is welding, welders. So when we start talking about the shortage and careers, they're focused on welders. They're not necessarily focused on pipe fitters, without the welding, or electricians and the like. But we can glean a lot from this particular survey. And the reason why is because it illustrates, right? It illustrates the fact that there definitely is a stigma against the trades. And it's one that we need to take a good look at, right? Now, in another episode, in a future episode, I should say, I don't have it listed out like in what timeline order it's going to be just yet. But it's going to be something to the effect of a note to the industry, because the industry as a whole, we've been falling short for quite some time about being proactive. Now, in this particular instance, in this episode, I'm going to say we're not proactive in dealing with the trades. Again, this is not at a company level. Some companies are doing better than others, which, it's commendable on them. But this is an entire industry issue as far as I'm concerned. And it's one that we don't adequately deal with, or at least acknowledge to potentially, address down the line. But from the stigma perspective, I can take this a step further and connect dots and say, okay, well, what we're really not doing is understanding the complexity, right? Everything that we got going on from an economic perspective to generational differences and the like, and the way people are raised, and various industries that have crept up in the past 20, 25 years. And then you can also bring in the stigma. So this is just part of that bigger episode that I intend to drop later on down the line. I'm not exactly sure when. I kind of want to gain a little bit more relevancy on the podcast perspective before I do, because I want it to be taken very seriously. This is not, again, a contractor problem. This is an industry problem, bar and wide. And to be frank, this has been an industry problem, at least from a stigma perspective, for 40 years. So I'm going to start off this podcast episode with referencing, all right, word for word, exactly what was in the article. And this is kind of, if you want to, you can go and look at the wealthyironworker.com. You can see how I think the title of the article is How the AWS is Right on This. It's battling the trade stigma. It's definitely out there, right? But this is how it starts, at least from where I brought in, their line by line, word for word item. Today, much of the nation's infrastructure is aging and requires the expertise of skilled workers to rebuild bridges, highways, and underground pipelines. However, older tradespeople are nearing retirement age much faster than they can be replaced by younger counterparts. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics suggests more than half of all skilled trades workers, such as welders, are 45 years or older. As a result, jobs that require trade skills vastly outnumber the available workforce. The AWS predicts a shortage of more than 375,000 skilled welding professionals by 2030, end quote. Now, a couple things to pull out of there right off the bat is, they talk about such as welders, right? The AWS is really pinging on welders here. But they also talk about how they're 45 years or older. and those of you who've been in the trades, you can back me up. You intuitively know this. There is a huge age gap. We have people in the trades that are coming in now. I was just talking with apprentices last weekend where you've got 25 to 30 years old. Some of them are even younger than that. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of the ones in the apprenticeship are 21, 22, and the like. And the oldest is like 30. And then you got some people in the trades that are 50 and older. And so we had this age gap. This age gap that is first off, it highlights a problem on our end, right? To do some active recruiting and to invest in our own firms. But secondly, it illustrates a problem that we got now will turn into a significant problem down the line. And so we have to be very intentional about what we do, about how we incentivize people and bring them in. And you can't do that, or at least you can't do it to the fullest extent without first acknowledging that there's a stigma, and secondly, trying to address it. Now, again, some companies do a better job at this. I've seen companies that are very intentional. They have outreach. They actively try and use social media to their advantage, and for a positive perspective. They also do recruitment, initiatives and whatnot, and they're doing what they can. And from a company perspective, they seem to be doing okay. Kudos to them because they've got their head on their shoulders right. But a company is nothing more, if you want the truth. A company, or an industry for that matter, is nothing more than the individuals who are comprised of that industry, right? And so if you've got you got a company, and this is true, there are companies out there that are almost wholly made up of 45 to 50-year-olds and older. And you can tell they have no social media presence. They have no online presence. There's no website to speak of. And if there is, it certainly doesn't gain any traffic, and it looks very, old and outdated, and it's not interesting, and, and the like. They're very adverse to technology. Now, they bring a level of experience and skill. Not dismissing that at all. What I'm bringing up, though, is when you compare that company to one who is full of somebody who is in the 30s and the 40s, you see a stark difference. You see a company that may not have quite as much expertise. To be sure, that company that's comprised of 30 and 40-year-olds, they got some older people that are probably running it, but they have a different mindset. Those people, right? They are actively, intentionally trying to change the way that they run, and they're bringing in the ideas from the younger people. The major difference, it's not expertise at this point, that I want to bring out between those two companies is that older company, the success rate for them in 15 years dwindles. I mean, it's off the cliff. It's like we're going to go to a cliff, and then we just drop off. And the reason why is there's no succession plan. There's nobody in the wings to come up underneath them to embrace the various bits of technology that the industry is seeing. Another whole other podcast episode down the line. And then when you compare it to this 30 and 40-year-old company, when we go 15 years and this other company goes off a cliff, this company has the expertise and has changed their perception, the way they've been viewed. They've changed their perception. Kudos to that company. But the hard work starts now. Actually, it started 10, 15 years ago. The next best time to start the hard work is now, because you need time to build up a workforce, to build up expertise, and to build up individuals that embrace technology and will address the stigma that's associated with the trades. All right. So let me continue on with bits of information from the article not my article, but from the American Welding Society article, right? And let me detail the survey, the actual numbers from the survey, right? So this is, again, done by Metal Supermarket. If you go to thewealthyironworker.com, you can find the link. You can go there and you can check it out yourself, all right? And these are very eye-opening as far as I'm concerned. If they don't illustrate, if you listen to these right here and they don't illustrate a problem from an industry viewed perspective, the way people view our industry, then you need to check your pulse, because something's not right here, okay? Number one, 56% say they are not or never were interested in going to a trade school. That's over half. So what they did was they went out there and talked to these people, and over half, 56%, said, I am not interested in going to a trade school for a multitude of reasons. Now, just off the top, if that were the only statistic, that they brought forth, you'd think, well, why are you bringing this up? Right? It doesn't clearly indicate, a problem or a stigma right off the get-go. 55%, here's second point. 55% said people with office jobs earn more respect. Hear that again. They earn more respect than those who work with their hands. That's 55%. Let me tell you right today, I'm speaking as clearly and as focused as possible. That's a problem. That's a problem. There are office jobs that can go away today, and we'll find a way to work. We'll find a way to function. We'll find a way to thrive and continue on. There are some that's certainly the case. But the skilled trades jobs, millions in the country today, those trade jobs, and I said it in episode number 1, I believe, if I could wave a magic wand and everybody in the trades went home for 2 weeks, this country would come to a grinding halt. That's just truth. Think about, and there are a lot of times and a lot of jobs and a lot of amenities and a lot of things that we take for granted that a lot of us in the trades bring to society. And quite frankly, the construction industry is the largest industry in the world. And office people whose jobs, not all of them, don't get me wrong, but there are some who can go away. None of ours can go away. And they earn more respect than we do. That's a problem. And I would say that definitely highlights a stigma associated with us and what we do for a living and the fact that we work with our hands. We need to bring nobility back to this. All right. Number 3, 74% said traditional college gives you a better future than trade school. Now, this, not only does this indicate the stigma to a degree, but this also indicates what I've talked about in the first episode, which is we have this, for whatever reason, there's this cultural thing that we think, okay, well, you're automatically going to get off the conveyor belt of normal education experience, and I'm going to put you on the conveyor belt to college, and I'm going to send you on down that way, and that's just de facto what you're going to do. And so this idea that you're automatically going to go to college and you're going to come out and you're going to be in a better situation and setup than you were if you went to a trade school or even military for that matter, is just, it's very good. All right. Propaganda. Let me say that right now. It's very, very good propaganda. And we've had 40 years to sit here and set this propaganda up. All right. That's a problem. All right. Next point. 65% believe that student debt was the price you pay for a college education. 65% believe that student debt was the price that you pay for a college education. Are we serious here? What they don't highlight, and what I know to be true, maybe this is another show note set up for another episode here, but the cost of college tuition has risen. It has outpaced inflation largely. I mean, like, it's amazing the amount of money that you pay for a college tuition today for a bachelor's degree that you did 40 years ago. It's ridiculous when we start talking about inflation. Now we're going to get into some of the good statistics, if you will, the ones that clearly indicate a bias towards the trades and a skilled trades problem. 62% reveal they didn't learn about trade school options in high school. 62%. Now, you tell me if that's not a problem. If 62% respond to a survey and they sit here and tell you, I never even heard about trade schools. I was never told about trade school options. I didn't know anything existed. You want the truth about it? I didn't know. Even though I had friends who were doing like automotive stuff, they were doing classes and they were leaving to go to do automotive. It was not actively promoted. It was just something that he wanted to do. He wanted to be as a matter of fact, he still is today. He runs a shop foreman, so he runs things today. But when we look at it, 62% were never told about this. That's a significant issue. All right, 68%, 68 said trade schools were never discussed by their guidance counselor. Now think about that one. 68%, 2/3. So 2/3 of the kids responded to this survey, and what they said is the guidance counselor. And let's just unpack the name for a second. You are provide guidance, and you are to counsel. Guidance counselor. I've taken two words that roughly mean the same thing, brought them together, which means you doubly ought to be providing guidance to young people, and you're not actively talking about the opportunities for the trades. This is why in episode number 1, I said if you are in the educational system, that this podcast is for you, because you is a dereliction of duty if you are not talking about it. Because I can tell you from a fact, there is ample opportunity in the trades. We sit here and toss around numbers. If you remember from the opening monologue that I said that the AWS predicts a shortage of 375,000 people. That's just the AWS. By 2030, for the skilled trades overall, we're talking about 2 to 3 million people. So now we're dealing with the law of supply and demand. And it just becomes increasingly more important to talk about this. And for those of you who are guidance counselors, you are missing the mark. You are missing the opportunity for you to address a particular student, or students for that matter, and change their life for the better. What would it look like if you saw brilliance in some of those young people and told them about the opportunity for the trades and said, this is the direction you're going to want to go because of the sheer opportunity? Better yet, maybe you bring people in from the trades, right? And allow them to have conversations, Q&A, back and forth. Let's have discussions, right? Let's put pen to paper. Let's talk about money. Let's talk about opportunity. Let's talk about college debt that you don't claim bankruptcy on. All of these things. Let's have this conversation. Now, in a moment of fairness, let's be honest. I'm aware that there are people out there who are actively, they're pursuing these. They're bringing in people. I know some people who are doing this. I got a counterpart up in Michigan. I mean, he doesn't do what I do, but he is very aggressive. He's very active in explaining what ironworkers do, because we're ironworkers, right? But the same can be said for electricians or pipe fitters or whatever. And he is seeing an increase in requests for him to come and talk to various students. And it certainly seems like the light is beginning to shed on problems from a higher educational perspective. And if you want any more indicator that is actually taking place, all you really got to do is look at how much universities and colleges, and more specifically, how colleges are starting to really ramp up their skilled trades initiative. Well, it's a step in the right direction because they're not actively and aggressively promoting what I would say are useless degrees. I mean, if you're going to go and you just want educational growth, then liberal arts is the way to go. However, this idea that the trades training that you're going to get is any more valuable than you're going to get from an apprenticeship is a non-starter. So I would look and actively look at trades. Nonetheless, the point that I'm making, at least from that perspective, is that there are people out there who are seeing the light, and kudos to them for doing that. Now, on to the last one that I think is very, very telling. And by the way, this is my favorite statistic. 51%, so over half, 51% said they would rather work as a barista than a welder. So over half of the respondents said, I would rather work at a coffee shop serving coffee than be a welder. You tell me that's not a problem? Excuse me, I'm sorry. 51%, over half of the people asked said, I would rather be a barista. I would rather pour coffee. I'd rather work at a coffee shop than be a welder. There's no way that you're going to convince me that the opportunity there and the money that you're going to make at a coffee shop is going to be equal to that of a welder. So what are we talking about here? If we're not talking about a trade stigma, what are we talking about? If we're also not talking about people being super comfortable wherever their situations happen to be. And what I mean by that is if you can make it in a robust way on the money that a barista makes, I'm inclined to say that you have a level of comfort that is it baffles me. I mean, I'm almost speechless. I'm not, but I'm almost, because that doesn't make any sense to me. The idea that you're going to make it single income, I mean, maybe even two incomes, right? But the idea that you're going to make it as a barista and pay all your bills, with inflation being what it is and the cost of housing, et cetera, being what it is, the idea that over half have said, okay, well, I want to be a barista than a welder, blows my mind. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't compute. And it tells me that there is a stigma against the trades, as well as a comfort level of those same individuals. They must have 10 roommates, or they live with their mother and father, and mother and father aren't putting the squeeze on them to launch into adulthood and to become self-sufficient, or some other reason that's uncovered for me. Because the idea that over half say this, it's mind-boggling to me. Now, this is a problem. This is just addresses, by the way, stigma. And to be fair, that's what I said this episode was going to be about, and it certainly is. But the problem is that we aren't just dealing with the stigma. We're also dealing with other facets to this. This is a multifaceted problem, right? Again, this is another podcast episode down the line. But, and this is a big but, the trades are having to compete with other industries like they never have before. That's a compounding problem, right? I think it was Einstein who said compounding interest was the eighth wonder of the world. Well, compounding interest also works for problems as well. And that's what we have problems. And we have problems with a stigma that turns into increased difficulty in the competition market for people to come and join and do what we do, regardless of the opportunity, which, by the way, I don't think I talked about this early on. This is the article that I wrote on the website that got me in touch with two PhD candidates. Both were looking at the supply and demand. They were looking at the opportunity that the trades brought forth, and they began to wonder, why is it that the trades are having a difficult time recruiting and retaining people? That led them to do some research, which led them to the article, which led them to having conversations with me. One of them, we did a over the phone interview, and by the end of it, he sent me an email and he said, hey, have you thought about doing a podcast? Because you explain things in certain ways that others can readily understand, as well as increase your reach. Seed planted. All right. Now, we need to address this stigma. And like I said before, some companies are doing a better job, but this is an industry problem. This is something that we need to actively take a look at. Okay. And here's a nice quote when we continue on in that article. Again, the link is on the website. Quote, the start of the trade school stigma can be traced to the 1980s with the release of A Nation at Risk, a government report that stoked concerns about the American education system. Now, don't let me monopolize this podcast episode and say the American education system is stellar. It's great. It's not. As a matter of fact, it's garbage. And if they're highlighting a need to deal with it back in the 80s, it's most certainly a problem now. I would contend the educational system has dropped significantly. It's one of the reasons why we're like, We make the choices that we make, and my wife homeschools our kids because they're getting the best education they possibly can. And it certainly has gone downhill. And so we've seen a doubling then, a double down of, well, we need to invest in the education system. Nah, I don't think that's the case. Certainly not the case as opposed to the trades. There are other things that we should do to the educational system that have nothing to do with smearing trades or, let's spend more money in the system overall. There are a lot more effective things that we could do. Not going to monopolize the episode. We'll talk about that later, if we even address it at all. But the issue at hand, okay, is that we look at these quote unquote declining test scores all over the country in various disciplines. And what we do is we sit here and doubly put emphasis on going to college instead of, at the same time, also bolstering trades. And what you have then is an unfair, an unjust, and I'm looking for the right word here. We got to focus on the college education system that drastically changes the bell curve. That's not true. The bell curve stays where it's at. The admission changes. Because the bell curve, the average individual resides in the middle of the bell curve, and college education is supposed to be this pinnacle, if you will. And to allow a massive influx of people into the educational system, we have to reduce educational standards to allow that massive influx. Right? And so now there are statements that people make like the master's is the new bachelor's. That's problematic in and of itself. And that's illustrative of the what I just said, which is the educational quality has slipped to allow people in mass to come into this system. And at the same time, while denigrating the trades, while making it seem like college is the best thing since sliced bread, and not talking about the infrastructure and the continued investment that we need on our side. So I'm gonna talk about two personal stigma examples that I'm aware of, and then we're gonna get into what I think are some of the solutions or prescriptions. Number one, I can remember an OSHA class years and years ago that I was taking with a guy, and he was an iron worker by trade. And he said something to the effect of, we always talk about how we want better for our kids. We want better for our kids than what we've gotten or what we've had, just like our parents wanted better for us than them. But then he said something else that I thought was very eye-opening. He said, this has not been a bad career. This is not bad. This is pretty good, actually. And that last little tagline, that last little caveat, that this has been good, is something that's desperately needed. We desperately need to talk about and promote the trades to the degree that we're doing. We need to have that conversation. We need to have those talking points. We need to talk about them ad nauseum, continually, sit here and promote the trades with our conversations and be proud. Reintroduce pride. Now, ironworkers in general are probably the most prideful of the trades, but in reality, let's talk about the pride that I'm talking about isn't necessarily, well, I'm an ironworker, I'm the best. It's the trades are worthy, deserve, and should receive all of the respect possible, because we can go home and everything crumbles. So we need to actively promote this. And this is at the industry level, at a contractor level, at an institution level, and at an individual level, right? Individuals have significant influence over how the trades are perceived. Right, wrong, or indifferent. That's the reality. And so when you run around and you sit here and talk about how great the trades have been, how they provided for you, X, Y, and Z, they might have provided for you a family home. There was an example that was out of Seattle, I believe. There was a guy, he was a Native American, had never left. I'll see if I can't eventually get either him or somebody else on right, to talk about the benefits the trades have brought to them. He had never left the reservation in Washington. He had never left the reservation. He becomes an iron worker. He goes through the apprenticeship, and then he takes his entire family on a vacation to Hawaii. If that's not a success story that we ought to be propping up everywhere, but the reality is fewer at least people know about it. And that's a significant issue as far as I'm concerned. We ought to be talking about that from the rooftops. All right. Secondly, we ought to be seeking ways to talk about that. Right? If we can go to a career day, if we can sit here and, get on a podcast, right? It's to hope that this podcast becomes a pretty large platform for individuals in the trades to talk about how it's changed their life and how it affects them. And I'm case in point, I'm one, right? My wife is a stay-at-home mom. She's doing exactly what she wants to do, which is stay at home with our kids and raise them up and homeschool them and take field trips and go to the library and go visit places and, join me on trips if she possibly can. And the kids are getting the best educational quality they can. My wife is getting what they want. And this is all because I've been a trades member for 22 years. So we need, on an individual level, to talk about these things. And we need to talk about it not just from an individual. We should do it. But from an individual all the way through an industry perspective. It should be an intentional, planned, of attack, for that matter. Secondly, we don't need to be like the individuals that you all know and have heard, and maybe you're one yourself, where you go out here and you're in the trades and you're telling the apprentices and you're telling other people out in the world, hey, you don't want to do this for a living. Why? Why is it intuitively we sit here and say to our kids, to other people's kids, to other people who we don't even know, we say, you don't want to do this for a living. You don't want to work with your hands. As if working with your hands, as if seeing something tangible at the end of the day, something completed, something done, something finished. I can see progress in what I've done. As if that right there, something in and of itself is negative, is disrespectful, is dirty, is problematic. That's an issue to me. And if you're in the trades, it should be an issue to you too. And if you're talking these talking points, then you ought to stop them. Because the health of the industry, the health of the economy, the country for that matter, right? And your way of life greatly depends on individuals coming into this trades and embracing what we all know to be true, which is there is nobility. Let me say it this way. There is nobility in working with your hands and getting things done. There is nobility in working with your hands and getting things done. We ought to be shouting this from the rooftops, not sitting here in corners whispering to the next generation that you don't want to work with your hands. And this includes my own kids, by the way. My own son, he's 6 years old. And I will be talking to him about opportunity and where is the opportunity at. And if he's embracing that pursuit of opportunity, and we sit here and have these conversations, and I'm going to sit here and say, hey, listen, there's opportunity in the trades. It's always something that you've got. This is where you should be looking for it. You don't think I'm not going to be pushing my own kids to look at the trades? You best believe I'll be talking to them. So I want to end with this. All right. We have a significant issue at our doorstep. The industry does. Totality. We need to look at the trades with a fresh and renewed perspective. No matter if you've been in the trades for a year or you've been in it for 30, we have to have people coming in and we have to compete. But in order to compete with other industries and the like, we need to understand that there is a stigma that is associated unfairly with us, and then we need to address it to the best of our ability. At the very least, not downtrod our own brothers and sisters and the work that we put in on a daily basis. And then secondly, seek to elevate the pay and the respect to be commensurate or equal to the level of importance that we bring to society. All right? If you have ideas, if you have questions, if you have comments, go to thewealthyironworker.com contact page, send them to me. Let me look at them. Let me read them. Let me see if I can address them. This has been the Wealthy Ironworker Podcast, and thank you for tuning in.